Let's return now to that breaking news that we've just learned, that the Ministry of Justice has confirmed that only a mere 100 spaces are left in male prisons in England and Wales. An astonishing revelation. And here to tell us more is GBNews' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome back to the show. We've been talking all of the show until this point about the huge number of arrests at the Notting Hill Carnival, 349, and a story earlier on today as well about people can simply say sorry to avoid jail. Maybe they knew that this news was coming. An astonishing admission, Mark. Only 100 spaces left for men in our creaking prison system.
Well, certainly with regard to the community resolution, that's quite separate, really, to those that they're expecting to send into the prison population. But clearly they are also taking drastic measures with regard to trying to reduce that prison population as well. You remember that just last week we got the news that the police service across much of the north of England was going to start this emergency measure of holding on to those arrested, not sending them to the courts, to try to relieve the number of people within the prison estate. Well, clearly it's got way beyond that now with just 100 spaces. That is not in the slightest workable, because it can just take not even a busy weekend, but just a busy weekday night in any city for 100 extra prison spaces to be taken up if these people then are remanded in custody. So we are really now at the limit. There is no more capacity, and as such the government needs to come up with very urgent and drastic actions. Now, in the space of a month or so, we were expecting this new 40% policy to come into place. That is, that if you serve just 40% of your sentence in custody, then you're entitled, providing you're not a serious violent or sexual offender, to be released on probation, basically. At the moment, it's 50% of your sentence, and then you get to serve the remainder of your sentence back in the community, on the proviso, of course, that if you reoffend, you're taken back into prison to serve the remainder of your sentence back in custody. But the government has now reached the decision and made the decision that that should be reduced to 40, which will free up thousands of additional prison places that are badly needed. But of course, it's very controversial, because the net result of that is you are sending thousands of convicted criminals, some, despite what they say, who may well pose a danger to the public, back onto the streets. And at the very least, even if they don't pose a direct danger to members of the public, then many of those people going back onto the streets will be what they call recidivists. They will be repeat offenders, because that is the pattern. A very significant, in fact, the majority of people who are released from prison within a year or two go on to reoffend and probably end up back in the prison system as well. So a significant proportion of those they're releasing will go back into the community and reoffend. It's highly controversial, but it's what the government sees as probably the only solution to a prison crisis which is so overlogged that it will just grind the whole of the criminal justice system to a halt.
And Mark White, when you look at 100 spaces left, I mean, there are over 200 people who've received a custodial sentence in wake of those protests and riots we saw after Southport. And look at the arrest tally after Notting Hill, Mark White. 61 police officers assaulted, 8 stabbings, 3 of those nearly fatal. 49 weapons seized, including 2 firearms, Mark White. 349 arrests. At this rate, Mark, the prisons will be full by tomorrow night if we're not careful.
Yeah, I mean, that 100 mark is just insignificant. It doesn't make any odds. The fact is, if you go beyond about a couple of thousand from capacity, you're in serious trouble, because as we say, it only takes a busy weekend somewhere for there to be a lot of arrests, such as at the Notting Hill Carnival, and for many of those people to be remanded in custody until their hearing, to really just stoke it up to complete capacity. So the fact that we're 100 short makes no odds. We have reached capacity. There is no more room in the prison estate. And all the while, more and more people are being arrested, because that's the daily process of law and order in this country, right across the country. Minute by minute, police are making arrests. They go in to the police prison or the police cell system to begin with, until a court appearance, and then depending on the serious nature of the indictable offence that they're accused of, they will go into the remand system. Hundreds every day enter the remand system. So we are in a deep crisis now. The government, as I say, has announced this 40% system to come into process in about a month's time. I think they're going to have to bring that forward and just get that working immediately, because without it, the criminal justice system grinds to a halt. But I say that, it's easier said than done, because you can't just turf out thousands of prisoners onto the street, Martin. You need the backup wraparound services that any prisoner being released requires. The probation hostel that they may go into in the first instance, the probation officers who are tasked with keeping an eye on these individuals to show that they're on the straight and narrow, they're not back and reoffending. It's a mess.
And Mark, we learned last week that they were going to start using prison cells to hold actual prisoners. So police becoming prison wardens. They're not trained to do that, and the actual prisons themselves aren't equipped for long-term stays. And I want to ask you this, Mark, as well as releasing people early, do you think we might see a return to a system of downgrading offenders so we don't jail them in the first place? So we talk about today there's a clampdown on shoplifting. Well, no, shoplifting is de facto legalised now. They can talk tough all they like. What other crimes may be downgraded to avoid a custodial sentence? And what message will that send out, Mark White, to those offending? If criminals know they won't get banged up, where's the incentive to not offend?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that will happen, Martin, and that would signal a schizophrenic approach to the criminal justice system, because you'll have the government and those in charge of law and order saying, on the one hand, that we're going to get tough, we're getting tough on the rioters, we're getting tough on the shoplifters, we're getting tough on the sexual offenders, all manner of crimes they're getting tough on. But on the other hand, those in the judiciary and the criminal justice system are being told that there is logjam within that system, within the prison service, and that actually, if they can avoid sending someone down the road of a prison sentence and go for a community option instead, or a fine, that should be the road to go. And you're right, it sends out a very worrying message that although the government might say on one hand we're being tough, in practice they're being very weak.
Mark White, excellent analysis as ever. I'm joined now by Gana Bell, a knife crime campaigner after her son Stefan was stabbed to death more than 20 years ago. Gana, welcome to the show. You may have overheard some of that conversation there. 100 spaces left now before we reach capacity in British prisons in England and Wales alone. And a story out today, which I know will concern you, Gana. More than 147,000 people accused of offences, including possession of weapons and violence, will simply say sorry and be given community resolution orders rather than going to jail. Again, what's your take on that?
I'm just devastated and appalled. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. The Colin Needle who killed my son has just been on a parole after 20 years because he committed another offence. I don't know what it is. I'm presuming it's violence. But basically, he's committed so many crimes and he's going back on the streets. He had a parole hearing, they've actually let him out. But this is just going on and on. I've worked with young people and, you know, they used to get sentenced if they were carrying a knife. It's got to somehow stop. All this has got to stop. It's going on and on and on until somebody actually puts a stop to it. You know, and to say, the saying that if you say sorry, you can get off of this. How ridiculous. We're going to see more and more life crime as it goes on. We really are. You know, I think I always say and drum it in, it's got to start as education. But, you know, they've known the prisons are full for many years. And I'm not a racist in any way. But, you know, there's a lot of foreigners in our prisoners that are taking room up. They should be sending them back to their own countries to have the sentences there. That would free up the prisons. You know, it's just ridiculous saying our prisons are full and we haven't got room for them. You know, I just find it ridiculous.
It's astonishing, Gana Bell. Every time I talk to you, there seems to be a fresh injustice poured upon you. Thank you very, very much for your work. We have a brief hit today, but let's please talk again soon. Gana Bell, thank you very, very much for joining us.